I'm joined here with the MP for Liverpool Walton, Steve Rotheram. Thanks for joining me. You got 81.3% of the vote. Was that the largest majority in the election? Do you know?
I'd like to round it up to 82%. If that's no, it was the largest majority in the country, but one other MP, which is George Howarth Knowsley, he got a higher vote, so the Labour vote came out in Knowsley. But there were obviously a number of other parties that did quite well there, and so overall it was a very impressive result across Merseyside, and that was reflected in what happened in Liverpool Walton.
How important do you think it is that young people take an interest in politics?
Of course, believe it or not, I was a young person once, and I was very interested in politics at the time. It was I was serving an apprenticeship around the time when Thatcher came to power. And I saw very quickly how, when I came out of my apprenticeship, the fact that there was a Tory government limited my opportunities. So that, for a lot of people, got my generation involved. And hopefully, you know, the younger generation now must be able to see what's happening to their lives and to their livelihoods with what the Tories are doing in regard to austerity and the changes that they're making, which will have a hugely detrimental impact on those people's opportunities to fulfil hopefully their ambitions to do well in society. And I look, for instance, what they're doing on higher education, and some of the things, you know, such as the removal of student maintenance grants, are just appalling. I'd like to see a few more people, actually, young people, standing up and fighting back and doing what we did, you know, when I and others were that age.
How do you try to get young people involved in politics in Walton?
Well, I go around to a lot of the schools and I speak to some of the students and pupils, and we do a lot with the likes of the Liverpool student unions. You know, there are 3 main universities, but I also include Liverpool in that, which is a university in its own right. So there are 4 unis, and we try to get in and, you know, speak to people to try and make them understand that they can have an impact on government thinking. If you have a look at what the government do in regard to older people, that's because they're frightened, because the older people tend to vote. And if young people get off the backsides and help themselves by going and voting against the policies that they disagree with, they'll be more likely to be listened to, I think, by a Tory government that pretty much doesn't care less about that demographic.
How did you first get involved in politics? You mentioned it was during the Thatcher era.
Yeah, I mean, that's when it almost radicalised, I think, a whole group of people when we saw what Thatcher did to our city. You know, 1983, around the cabinet table, they were talking about the demise of Liverpool, about managing its decline. So, you know, I could see that happening for huge swathes of young people and, of course, older people at that time. That really got us to do something about what we saw as the unfairness, and that could be in a, you know, in their own way, slightly less active than what people were doing at that time, which is marching, you know, and fighting the Tories and getting the message over and going out and trying campaign to get them removed from government. But in their own ways, different people did things in their workplaces. So for me, I've got a family. My dad was a councillor, for instance. I've always been politically aware and politically active in my own way, and it wasn't really until I got married and moved to the constituency that I now represent, and there was an issue in regard to a nursery that my son went to when he was 4 years of age. Literally, it was bucketing down with rain coming through the ceiling and really dilapidated. And the local MP at the time, Peter Kilfoyle, my predecessor, went to address parents, and I was one of the parents, so I went along and afterwards I had a chat to him, and he said to me, which I say to people now, don't just moan about it, do something about it. And so I did, and I became active in my ward, which was Liverpool, which was Fazackley, which is part of Liverpool Walton. and there I met other like-minded people, and within about 5 years I was standing for council, and then a few years after that I became Lord Mayor of Liverpool, and then when Peter stepped down I filled his shoes. And I'm not saying that's a recipe for everybody who joins, but it was something that if I hadn't have really got actively involved would never have happened to me.
What does your role as Parliamentary Private Secretary for Jeremy Corbyn involve?
It's a bit of a mixed bag. I don't know whether you saw, but when I was offered the job, he offered me a number of different alternatives, but this was one of them, and I thought about it, and then I phoned him and said, listen, I think you might be getting me mixed up with somebody, because I'm not a bag carrier, I'm not decrying other people who do that sort of role, but in politics it's seen that if you're a PPS, that's the one follow the lead around, and it's not really seen to be a high level job. And he said to me, well, it depends on what you think the job would entail. So I said, well, if you can tell me. Basically what I do now, it's I'm one of Jeremy's aides, if you like, so we meet on a daily basis and we go through what the future agenda might be, and try to strategically plan, if we get the opportunity, for what might be coming down the line. And then we do prep for PMQs and stuff like that, and it's a hugely influential role I have in regard to I can try to tweak things, to try and influence things in a positive way. It gives me an opportunity, of course, to put Liverpool's case forward, right to the very heart of the party. And so, I've found it thoroughly enjoyable, and I'd recommend anybody who wants to do that sort of thing. It's a great opportunity to help the party, but it's also a great learning tool as well for yourself.
You introduced the tyres on buses and coaches bill. This didn't become law, but how close was it to becoming law?
Well, it was close to becoming law in as much as if Labour had won in 2015, we were going to adopt my bill. And so within months I would have been pushing Parliament to take a vote on our legislation that we would have brought forward, and I think pretty much that Parliament would have adopted it. There's no real political will within the Tories to re-look at this now in this new parliamentary session, and so we've pretty much got to start again and hope if a future Labour government comes to power that they'll look again to adopt this as policy. But it was very disappointing having put the work in that we all put in, and Frances Malloy is the one who deserves the credit for this. She was the one who drove this whole process. I just helped in the parliamentary context to try and get the time to debate it. But for the Tories not to take this seriously, and even the SNP, we wrote to Nicola Sturgeon and got a very curt response back from their Transport Minister. But for them not to take this seriously, I think just shows where certain parties' priorities actually lie.
What did the bill involve? It was something to do with the length of time the tyres had changed, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it comes from, there was a crash, a coach crash from a gig that was in the Isle of Wight, which is called the Festival. And on the way back, the front tyre blew out, and it caused this catastrophic crash that resulted in 3 people losing their lives. One of them was Frances Malloy's son, and her shock at the loss of somebody she loved very, very dearly was compounded by the fact that the coroner ruled that the tyre was 19 and a half years of age, and if it had just been an ordinary tyre on there, it was very unlikely that it would have blew out in the way that it did, and that means that the accident was preventable. And I think losing someone's bad enough, knowing that it was eminently preventable, I think really caused Frances lots of problems, and what she wanted to do is to ensure that no other mother went through the pain and the sorrow that she had to go through. And you know, when you think about it logically, 20 years, a tire, 20 years of age, I mean, you don't see anybody walking around with a phone that's 20 years of age, but trusting your safety to something that is that old and that we know, because we've got all the scientific evidence that says that the rubber of the tyre deteriorates over that period of time, and it delaminates from the steel radial belt. So it's all there, and you know, it's not something even that the Tories argued about in regard to the evidence. It was the will to do something about it, and that's really where the frustration that we felt was at its greatest. And I do still think that it's something that the Tories will at some stage have to revisit.
Do you think the media has too much control over our politics?
I think it's far too influential in certain aspects, and I'll give you an example. If you have a look at the Labour manifesto from 2015, in the cold light of day, and you get as many people to look at that and to decide whether they liked or disliked the proposed policies within that, I think you get huge support for the majority of what that contains, that manifesto. But of course, the vehicle for getting the details of that manifesto out was our leader, Ed Miliband, and almost from day one, he didn't get a fair crack of the whip from the media. They really had it in for him. Remember the infamous bacon sandwich photos and all that. What that had to do with him running a government or running a country, I really don't know. But those sorts of things, those images and that unfairness that he faced on a daily basis, obviously transmitted itself to the country. And if you have a look at most of the polls, they didn't trust him because of the way that he looked or ate a sandwich. So the influence, despite the fact that newspapers, we've just seen the Independent on Sunday having to close down and go online, it's still great, you know. Definitely the circulation and the newspaper readership itself, you know, the hard copies is reduced, but I still think that what they write is hugely influential in people's attitudes and how they form their opinions. And we're going to see that over the next few months with the EU referendum, the potential EU referendum, because we don't know quite what Cameron might get out of the next few hours of the negotiations. And so I would think that the press really needed to embrace what Leveson spoken about, you know, what his recommendations were, and they fought tooth and nail against it. In fact, they put every hurdle they can against that, and therefore I still think the time will come when there will have to be some regulation that's external rather than the self-regulation that they prefer.
You mentioned the EU referendum. Do you think 16 and 17-year-olds should be allowed to vote?
I've got a bit of a difficulty here because I asked my two daughters, who at the time were 16 and 18, about whether they think that their peer group, not just them but their friends, would vote if the opportunity arose, and a lot of them were not interested in the slightest. I mean, I know a lot of people who go to university, and a lot of the students through student unions are very actively involved in politics, but I'm talking about across the board. And what I'd hate to see is the opportunity squandered. So I think the first thing that I would like to see is, as part of citizenship in schools, is politics being a core subject, so that if we're going to give the votes to 16-year-olds, they fully understand and appreciate everything about what that responsibility entails. So I'd like to start a little bit before, but I think on such a huge issue as the European Union, and it being a one-off referendum, and the fact that 16, 17-year-olds will be the ones who probably will live the longest to see whatever the result of that referendum would be. I would have gone for it this time, because I think that the issue would be widely debated and there would be an opportunity for 16, 17-year-olds, young people, to form a balanced view one way or another. But I do think that even if that doesn't happen, we still need to do something about the sort of democratic deficit that we've got in the country, about huge swathes of people, even at 18, 19, 20, just talking before about some of the young people, about their engagement. Yeah, it's about engaging it, so that's our fault because we're not engaging with them. But also, they need to take the opportunity that's presented to them to actually go out and put an X on a ballot paper once every year or once every 5 years.
What is your opinion on Jeremy Hunt's handling of the NHS and the recent doctor strikes?
Well, he's an absolute disaster, the man. I think he was a very poor Secretary of State at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. I think that pales in significance when you see the way he's handled or mishandled something that should have been negotiated in the first instance and then some sort of loose agreement before he went into the final details. And junior doctors, they're not the most militant of people, and you would think that given the degrees that they've had to achieve to even go into this field, that they're not thick. And Jeremy Hunt is treating them as if they actually don't understand what the argument is. He's actually saying that they're being misled by the BMA because the BMA is saying X, Y and Z. Well, even if they were, I'm sure that these people, highly qualified, hugely intelligent, the majority of them, would be able to make their own minds up if they were being led up the garden path. So I think Hunt's handling of the whole situation has been really, really poor. And there's only one person to blame, it's the doctors, or the junior doctors. It's Hunt, and I think part of his strategy has been to pick a fight where he thinks he could have won. Because I do still think deep down he harbours ambitions to be the future leader of the Tory party. And we know that Cameron will step down in probably the end of 2018, maybe 19, to give somebody a run into the election in 2020. And so, people are starting to jockey for position. You've got Boris, you've got Osborne, who's trying to build this surplus of monies that he hopes to be able to give away to people in 2019 so that they'll get that feel-good factor running into the election in 2020. Because he believes that he'll be the Prime Minister then. And then you've got Theresa May and others who have also got ambitions. So it's going to be very interesting, but I think Hunt has misjudged it and damaged his reputation now.
Do you think Labour can win the 2020 election with the current leadership?
I don't think it's anything to do with the current leadership. I think our job is going to be difficult anyway, coming from the baseline that we're at. But again, the Tories sort of capitalising on their period in power are going to change the boundaries. And so whoever the leader was or is going to be faced with the huge task of overcoming these new constituency boundaries, which disproportionately will affect ourselves. And then there have been changes to the way political parties are funded through something called short monies, and that's going to hit our ability, Labour Party's ability to run active campaigns, because it's all based on how much you can spend, and the Tories massively outspend us anyway. And the fact that this short money helps us to run a party in opposition is going to be really difficult for us when we have that reduction. And then the final piece of the jigsaw, of course, is the trade union bill. So that might be £8 million reduction in what we get in to be able to fight an election. So that's your backdrop. And then you've got new boundaries that we'll be fighting on. So it's going to be it's going to be very difficult. I think the sort of the glimmer of hope is that Jeremy, under his leadership, has started to enthuse a new group of people into politics. Some young people, thankfully, who are coming on board. In Liverpool Walton, for instance, 475 young people now, members of the Labour Party. Absolutely huge numbers of people who have joined. That's affiliates and full members in Liverpool Walton. And when I took over, there was only 111 members in totality.
What do you think Labour need to do to appeal to more voters?
Again, we've got the difficulties that we can't really shift, which are, you know, a press that's not particularly friendly towards us. The ability for us to get our message over curtailed by a reduction in funding. But of course, there's also social media now, which I do think will play a much more significant part in elections, right up in the run up to 2020. And Jeremy's been able to, again, harness a lot of that energy and enthusiasm on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and other things that I've probably never ever used. So yeah, there's a real chance for us to use that. But I think our chances will be determined by what we put forward and the arguments that we put forward over the next 4 years, and not what happens in the sort of 6 or 12 months before a general election in 2020. So we've got to develop clear policies now that resonate with people, not just in areas like mine, because it's great to get the largest majority in the country. Genuinely is. It shows you the sort of support that I get for what I've tried to achieve for people in Liverpool. But it's no good me increasing mine if we're losing other seats by a few hundred. And so it's trying to reach out to those marginals, and beyond those marginals actually. We need to win seats in areas in the southeast and the southwest even. And so it's getting the messaging right, I think. And despite the fact the media will try to misinterpret what we are trying to achieve, I think if you do that through direct messaging, that's a much more powerful tool for us.
Why do you think young people should join the Labour Party? You mentioned that the membership's increased here.
Massively, hugely.
Why
yeah.
do you think more young people should?
Well, I'm probably going to commit sacrilege here and say I think young people should get involved in whatever political party they think is most clearly aligned to what their principles and values are. So get involved in politics, and that's how you start to hopefully change society for the better. But I'd appeal to anybody who is thinking about joining a political party to look carefully at the Labour Party and see what it has to offer for young people. And we've got far more attraction, I think, for people of that certain, you know, the younger demographic than any other political party. And you know, things like trying to stand up for them now in opposition, and then putting forward what I was explaining before about clear and concise policies that will attract those people to vote for us. I think if they join now, they'll be able to influence those policies. They'll be able to, as I said before, tweak things in their direction. So there's never been really a better time for people to get active, to become part of a very progressive movement, and to try and change politics for the better, not just for them, but for the society that they live in.
Moving on to America, what is your opinion on Donald Trump's presidential campaign, and do you think he should be banned from the UK?
Well, I'll start with the second bit, which is whether I think he should be banned. And actually, I don't think that we should ban him. I think if he came over here and people seen him for himself, they'd realise what an idiot the man is, and how toxic and vile and vindictive and vicious his political ideology is. So I don't think we should keep him out. In fact, in some ways, I think the more exposure that Donald Trump gets, the worse it'll become for Donald Trump. I also, I did a sort of a quick look at some of the things that he said, and they do cause some genuine concern. If you have a look at the rise of fascism, and there's been a lot of comparisons between, is he the new Hitler and all that, and I'm not in any way going to go to any of them extremes, but just the rise of fascism, a lot of the same rhetoric was used at that time, and it's Trump's using it. Okay, it was primarily targeted towards demonising Jewish community, but he's doing the same with the Muslim community, and some of the things are very worrying that he's saying, and I think the American public will see through that eventually. But at the moment, it's almost that anti-politics thing. I think that's where Jeremy really encapsulated what was happening much more than any of the other candidates, and I was supporting Andy Burnham at the time, and we didn't really see this groundswell, this grassroots movement as much as Jeremy did, and he jumped on that and captured that. And if you have a look at what's happening in America, the two candidates, the two extremes, the polarised views are, more of Jeremy type stuff on one side and more Farage type stuff on the other.
Even he's disagreeing with what Donald Trump says, though.
Farage?
Yeah.
I think Farage would argue with his own mother. I've unfortunately had the displeasure of meeting him on one occasion, and he is as balmy as he looks. He's a very... I think Farage is Farage's greatest supporter. I think if there was a Farage party, then I think he'd do very well. But his type of politics is as worrying as anything, except that I'd say the Trump stuff is explicit. It's in your face, he literally does come out and say what he's thinking. He gets flight of thought, I think, and just says it. Whereas on many occasions, I think Farage would like to say certain things, but he's a bit more circumspect because he thinks that it will be less palatable to a British audience. So I do think there's a lot of similarities in both of them. I think they are both really extreme in their views, but I do think that as a politician, Farage probably comes out ahead of Trump.
Do you have any funny stories from your time in politics?
There's a lot of funny stories. Unfortunately, I can't tell you a lot of them on camera. There's stuff when I was incredibly fortunate in 2008 to be the Lord Mayor of Liverpool, and it's a non-political post because you have to be independent because you chair the council, and when you meet people, you're not meeting them as a politician, you're meeting them as what's called a fair citizen of Liverpool. It was just an incredible year because 2008 was our European capital of culture, and so to spend 12 months going around, and I did 2,000 events in those 12 months, but to have seen Liverpool in all its glory, it was just, as I say, the most incredible thing. But my second day was entertaining the Queen for 5 hours, and anybody will tell you, they say 10 minutes with the Queen's quite stressful, so she was there for a full half day and a bit, going to different parts of Liverpool, and we'd met her and we went to the opening of the arena and convention centre, and then as she's saying goodbye, we had to be to St George's Hall to welcome her there. And so even though she had police outriders and everything, me and my wife, who was the Lady Mayoress, we somehow had to get through the traffic quicker than her to get to St George's Hall. So went all through the sort of back ways to get there, and we had to run through St John's Gardens. And anyway, we got there, and there was a huge guy with the earpiece on and all that, and you could see that he had something hidden in his jacket. And we had a driver who also looked after what's called the mayoral chains. That was his responsibility. So we go to walk into St George's Hall, and were stopped by this guy who asked whether we had any identity. And of course, we didn't have anything particular to this. So Dave, the driver, explained to him that the 2 chains should have identified who we were. And in fact, St George's Hall is the Lord Mayor's banqueting hall. It's because it's owned by the city. It was built under subscription, it's owned by the city. And this guy wouldn't let us in. So he said he wanted some ID. So Dave was trying to get a copy of the Echo from the night before, which had photos in us, so that we could go in and entertain Her Majesty the Queen. So it was a bit of an inauspicious start to our tenure as Lord Mayor and Lady Mayoress. But I actually, even though I was never a fan of the royal family, I found the time that I spent with the Queen absolutely entertaining. She was first rate, actually, and I won't go into full details because I'm saving it for a book at some stage, I'm sure, of stuff that's happened. But I had to do a contribution when it was the 60th anniversary, wasn't it, the Queen's anniversary, and Bishop James asked me to go to the Anglican Cathedral and tell this particular story about when she came to Liverpool. And so much so that I told it 2,500, maybe 3,000 people in the cathedral, and there was an audible gasp of disbelief that I'd actually taken the Queen on and made her laugh so much that there were tears rolling down her eyes. And for her to try and banter with a Scouser, I think she met a match on that occasion, but she really appreciated it, and she was great. So there's been stuff, and one of my great friends is Andy Burnham, and there are plenty of stories that I could tell you about me and Andy Burnham. He's a blue, by the way, massive, bitter blue, and I'm a red, and even though we're very, very close friends, there was a derby game in particular when Steven Gerrard scored a hat-trick at Anfield that we still talk about now.
I'm a blue.
Oh, right, okay. Well, you've got the scores then as well. You remember that game.
How do you think Liverpool will finish the season then?
Well, I think both clubs, to tell you the truth, are playing a brand of football that if they can just finish it off. I know Everton have got Lukaku, and he's, I think, the better of the strikers that are currently on display. But I think if we had Sturridge, if he was back to full fitness and played the part, I do think that we could finish probably as high as 5th or 6th, which is not very good, but in the context of what's happened over the season, I think it's a healthy position to build up for next year. Hopefully we will win the what we used to call the League Cup, the Capital One Cup, and we were very unfortunate. I went to the bowling ground at Upton Park. I thought we were unfortunate there with the kids to get beat. But even though I'm a dyed-in-the-wool red, it's Everton and the community that I have the most to do with, and I think what they do out and about, other than the football, is just superb, and they've won lots and lots of awards, Everton in the community. And so I have Everton in the community, like the social arm of a football club, and they do really good stuff. They've got Everton Free School, but it's the stuff that they do out for people, a lot of the vulnerable people as well in Merseyside, right away across the whole of Merseyside, or the Liverpool City region as it's called now. They do all that sort of stuff, and Liverpool are trying to learn from Everton on that. So I want both clubs to finish as high as they possibly can. There's a research study that is hopefully going to be carried out by one of the universities, similar to what they've done on the Beatles, to see what the economic benefit of football is. And so whilst, you know, I want Liverpool always to finish on top of Everton, I'd love us to be 1 and 2 or 3 and 4 or whatever, because if we have European football for both clubs, that filters down to the economic ability of the city to try and, you know, fight against the austerity from central government. So we're trying to do as much as we possibly can, I think, to buck some of the problems that we've had with the grants and the grant settlement. So yeah, if you finish 6th and we finished 5th, I think you might just scrape into the Europa. Hopefully, if we finish, well, if we were to win the Europa, we'd get into the Champions League, which would be even better. But if we finished 5th, we automatically qualify anyway because of the League Cup. Man City will be in the Champions League, so it could be European football for both of us. So I'd be more than happy with that.
Thanks very much.
No problems at all. Okay. Thanks, mate.
Thank you.